Welcome to another episode of The Growth Compass, where we seek direction in the ocean of business growth opportunities. Before we get started, real quick, I'd like to give a shout out to the sponsor, Senders, as I'm sure a lot of you guys listening have heard me talk about. I've had a personal journey with Senders. They take care of all the technical, complicated, behind the scenes stuff related to cold emailing. I started my journey with cold emailing last year, saw my deliverability plummet, tried to fix it myself, was introduced to Senders. They fixed everything for me, and I loved what they did so much. I asked them to sponsor this episode, and they said yes. So just like shouting them out before we get started. If anyone would like to do cold email correctly, you can reach me at the email in the show notes. And now introducing the guest for today. Give a little introduction to yourself, Bob.
Thanks, Blake. Bob Manasier, Robert Manasier Online, CEO of a portfolio of companies, all under the InFocus Brands banner. I've been starting companies since I was 13, all over the globe. So I've made a lot more mistakes than most other people I've ever met, learning from them all the time. I've made a million mistakes today already. It's all good. We learn, we get better, and I'm just looking forward to our conversation, Blake, since we have some connective tissue to upstate New York.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so before we started the this episode here, Bob and I were talking about our connections up at Union. It's a Schenectady area. The capital region has a really interesting entrepreneurial spirit to it, and both of us were involved at different points. And I had like a million follow-up questions, but I figured I'd just leave them for the episode. So I'm excited. Well, the first thing before we get into a lot of the interesting stuff you've done professionally. I'm just curious. I saw some different locations on your LinkedIn. Are you from the New York City area? From somewhere else? Have you moved around a little bit? How did you end up where you
Yeah,
are
I,
now?
gr- so I grew up in New York City, still have a house near there. I have a house in upstate New York in Saratoga. I've been all over the universe because InFocus Brands, when I started it, and the company before it that actually spawned it, and IFP Films, were global companies. So we deploy, right? So I've lived all over the world. We embed in companies, we launch them, we grow them, we scale them, we help them exit as the company, not under our banner. So I've lived everywhere. So I've been all over the place. And now that I have a house in Saratoga, I won't say what I'm like. There's a horse reference.
Yeah, I got it. Good one, good one. Well,
I'm
cool.
keeping it clean, Blake. I'm keeping it clean.
Well, we got so one of the things that was really interesting to me was typically there's a transition from like a an extended professional career to this consulting agency side, but it seemed like from a very early point in your career you transitioned to commercialization growth, starting your own business. So I'm curious, earlier in your career, what were the experiences that you were having? How did it shape, eventually going in your own direction?
That's going to take a few hours. I'm a million years old. So I've always loved the journey and the exploration of learning while you're doing it. So I've always been really focused on operations and the execution. Ideas are important, but we don't make any money from ideas, and everyone has a million ideas. So I've always loved the puzzle of taking an idea and making it a reality. Even since my earliest company that I did out of necessity, right? I had to start a company. I needed to make money, all the typical things. And I threw out some of that early naive belief that when you own your own company, you're your own boss. You never have to answer to anybody, right? Because you answer to everybody. And at that early age, I answered to everybody and their parents. So, and I loved it. Eventually, over time, I was like, this is what I really want to do. I love leading. I love building teams. I love empowering people. I love developing people. So fast forward through 100 and something companies, we're at this stage now where our portfolios all deploy companies. We drop into companies. We do the work with our clients or our partners. We build companies. But in order to scale, whatever got you to whatever point you're ready to go to the next level, you can't do the same thing. And I've said a million times, I don't like consultants, not the people. I don't like consultancy because it gives you big ideas backed by research that typically the companies can never do. They can't execute it on their own. And that's why we existed. We would create the strategies and then we would execute them with the client.
Interesting.
Fast
That's it.
forward to
That
that. Go
sorry, yeah,
ahead.
keep going. I have a question about that.
No, you can interrupt me anytime you want. I'm probably boring your audience already. You want to
I
ask
was
a
curious.
question?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna do it. We're gonna do it. So I'm curious. I've talked to a lot of people that own service agencies, and whether they call it an agency or a consultancy. And there's an interesting divide between people that like to take accountability for those deliverables post the strategy, and then people that don't. So, how did you come to the decision to be a company that would not only come up with the strategy, but also execute on those deliverables for your portfolio company?
Yeah, so a lot of the earliest concepts from failure that I learned is like I have to read markets, right? I have to see the way the customer or the customers are interacting with the service we're building or the product we're building, right? User experience, customer experience, market intelligence, all that stuff really matters. And you can't really read it from afar. Listen, they're really smart consultants out there. They build beautiful strategies, but the moment you put the idea of the strategy in place, execution takes over and everything changes. And it's, I give a lot of speeches to startups because I've started so many, and a lot of them don't like what I have to say. I was like, a startup is not a business. A startup is looking for a business model, right? Same thing with consultancy. Great strategy, but the moment that team that didn't build it has to execute, it's going to fall apart and there's nobody there to fix it.
Gotcha.
So what I always wanted to do was I want to build a strategy with you based on your resources and your skill sets. My team will come in with whatever you don't have and execute it. And then the moment we execute it, we're going to learn from that and we're going to have to change some of the plans we put in place. But all of that kind of bias against consultancies went to when I was very young. I was still in school. I built a product. I had made some money, so I was putting it back into the company. And I had a lot of much older consultants around me who literally didn't stop me from going off the cliff. And since that day, I put them in a different bucket, right? Experience leads a lot to how our biases are formed. So that's why I never wanted to run a consultancy. And now I'm my own worst enemy because now we're building one.
That's right. And which we also we'll get to in a second. So that was one of my questions was I think it's been about 20 years that you've been doing In Focus Brands. Congrats. That's awesome. And from the very beginning, you approached it with this perspective of we're not only going to come in and give you a high level strategy about how to do, but we're also going to execute it. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay,
You say
cool.
it better than
So
I do. So maybe I'll just have you as my spokesperson.
we could do that. I mean, I'd love it. I was just trying to synthesize all of
Okay.
it. So right before you went into developing In Focus Brands, what were you doing and what led you to feeling compelled to launch this In Focus brand?
I was running the film studio that I still have too, which is a major piece of our portfolio,
Awesome.
IFP Films. And I learned a lot of the market read and the engagement and the emotional triggers from filmmaking, right? I mean, especially now with social media, everything has to be storytelling. So it's only made us stronger. And that was 10 to 14 years before In Focus Brands was started that we just ran around the world as a bunch of crazy filmmakers making stuff. Documentaries, independent films, commercials, all that good stuff.
Okay, so from I guess the perspective that you were speaking to earlier about a startup is not a startup, they are searching for a business model. How long was your film company startup for before you found a business model for it, or did you have that from jump?
Yeah, so it probably took us 2 or 3 years. I mean, when we started the film company, it was at the end of actual film before the digital revolution. This is 1991. I was
Okay.
still in school when I started it. So I had filmmakers, and then we had to learn and transition into digital video. So we were still shooting film in the mid 90s because we had a huge contract with Kodak and so forth, but it was going the way of the dinosaur for the most part. And we still love film, it's just not very efficient. It's
Yeah,
so much
right, right,
easier
right.
now to create content, which is a good and a bad thing, right? When it's easy to do, like AI is doing for a lot of technology companies, it's a good and a bad. It's the pro and the con. But we went into independent production. We became an independent film studio pretty within the first year and a half because we didn't want to be a service industry company. We didn't want to shoot videos for other people. We had written a lot of scripts. We had written a lot of ideas for documentaries to travel the world. So I raised a lot of money and then we did that. And then obviously we had to create the business model of distribution because shooting film is fun. Editing's not that much fun. And then you have the real business is moving the product so you can get paid. So we had to learn all that. And, that was a great ride. And in that journey, I learned a lot about branded systems and building processes into companies. I learned a lot about advertising and marketing, and InFocus Brands was the child of it. And then pretty quickly, IFB, InFocus Brands, became the much larger company, actually.
Okay. And so what was it? One of my questions about IFBs, do you have a particular, out of either the companies you're currently working with or have worked with in the past, do you have a particular niche that you lean towards, either as far as industry or business model? And my guess would be you're coming out of film making, things like that. I don't know if that you lean towards that, but is there a focus?
No, there is no focus. We are agnostic. And what we spend a lot of time doing is building frameworks that can work for any industry. We've actually started companies in almost every industry. There are processes that all companies have to go through. There are processes for launch. There's different processes for growth. And there's very different processes for scale. And then there's the whole exit piece, which a lot of people get wrong,
Can
right?
you
And
can
that's a
you
whole different conversation.
Gotcha. Sorry, can you repeat those three steps? You said
Yeah,
there's
it's
different things.
launch, growth, scale. Like you can't use the same thing to launch that you do to grow. And the moment you start growing, you're like, I want to take this to a whole different level. You have to change your processes again. And InFocus Brands is not about logos, it's about branded systems built to the company you're working with and their resources and what they don't have. And that's always my disconnect with consultants. A lot of them write great plans that will never be applied into the company they wrote it for because they don't have the resources to do it.
Gotcha.
So it's always relevant for us. It's always relevant. It's always relevant to who we're talking to.
Okay. Uh, Two follow-up questions. First one is, again, either out of ones that you're currently working with or have worked with, is there a particular founding team product that you've had a journey with that sticks out to you that you usually use when you're speaking or you feel passionately about?
So with our track record, almost we can talk about any industry that's sitting in front of us, about what we've seen in the industry, what we've done in the industry. For me, you brought up the key point is a huge filter I use is the team or the person we're thinking about working with or partnering. You can teach a lot of skills to almost anybody. You can't teach certain things, coachability, no ego, self awareness, the lack of micromanaging you need. Like we
Sure, sure.
like autonomous people. We like people who are self motivated. So we look for that. We look for people that will admit their mistakes. I mean, and that's a hard one because listen, you're fighting a lot of battles every day as a business owner or as a founder. And, sometimes we put the ego up to protect ourselves, but that doesn't work inside of a team or a company. So we look for
So,
we look for all those things. And then we do some research about the market potential because you can work with great people and get nowhere. So it has to match,
right.
right?
All right, cool. So then mostly for you, what it comes down to as far as projects that you love working on, have loved working on, it's come down to the people, given that the market opportunity is there.
Yeah. And the only thing I ever say I'm proud of is that I have 100% retention for 30 years in all my companies. So the people I hired when I was 19 at IFB Films are still around with us. IFB has the same staff. We add to it because it's growing, but no one leaves. And that's
Oh, wow,
important to me because that's a relationship, right?
but right. I think if there's anything to be proud of, that would be it. Along
I'll
with the
take that
same,
one.
okay, good. Thank is that along with the same structure that you laid out, launch, grow, scale. One of your recent posts was about what you guys yourself are doing as it relates to either the grow or the scale aspect of it. Can you speak to that? What your journey has been personally with it?
Yeah, so obviously the biggest problem with in Focus Brands from a scale perspective is it takes 18 months to get trained in our company. And then we deploy. So if you're deployed, and I'll give you a recent example, we lived 6 months in Brazil. That means a few pieces of my company are not available to any other project except remote help, right? So we're limited on how many projects we can take on. And we usually average about 12 company engagements or deployments a year. And if you do the math, that makes sense that we got to 175 launches and so forth.
Right. Okay.
I can't scale that without just adding a lot of people, which I don't do because I'm really dictatorial about cross-training my people, because there's a few things about our brand that are really important to me. My people are always the most prepared, right? And that takes training. And we spend a lot of money and time professionally developing everybody in our company to make sure that we are better than we were yesterday professionally. The only way to scale the company to take all these massive resources and reach more businesses that need it is through a consulting model, which I have been against, as we talked about a few minutes ago, for a very
Right.
long time. But, I'd be disingenuous if I didn't say I have to do something differently to scale these operations than what I've done in the past. So the deploy white label model has been very successful for us. I love that model, but I can't take the company anywhere else. I have to try a different method and consulting. And I spent 2 years interviewing hundreds of consulting firms to figure out who would we joint venture with. And it came down to the right mindset and psychology. And that's why we joint ventured with Camelot Solutions. They had an online platform that we were thinking about building. They already had one in process. They had the same mindset: consult fast, get out, come back in when needed. Don't just stay there forever or stay there on a year contract if it's not needed, and the right resources at the right time, which has always been our saying, right? So that's what we're
So
doing
that
now.
so the launch of your consulting arm is to address the scale section of IFB.
Yeah, and to reach more businesses, because we all lived through COVID, and so many businesses went out. And one of the key aspects of why companies failed during COVID was that they didn't have access to a coach or a mentor, right? They didn't have other resources they can pull on to figure out what no one knew what was going on, right? Because you're a small business, your head's down, you're constantly working in it. You don't always get to look up and think differently. So we're like, we have all this experience and all this failure, right? Because from failure, we learn.
That's right.
We have all of this. Let's package it up so other people can use it. Obviously, we want to make money from it too, but it's also to reach a larger audience.
So along with the theme of the podcast, most of it is, like we're talking about learning. I try to do as much experimentation, learning, failure as possible. But something that really interests me, it's amazing that you use this exact language because it's what I landed on to describe my own passions, which is bringing an idea from inception into the world. And that's what's been driving me, for the past 5 years of my life. Feels like what's going to drive me for the rest of my life. And that's how I ended up in this area of growth strategy, growth tactics, understanding how to grow business. So I wanted to ask, in your experience, you said there's a couple steps that any company needs to go through, and then there's also custom solutions based on product, onboarding experience, all these things. As it relates to growing in a particular market, in a particular segment of a market, once you have a product or you're iterating on your product consistently. What has your experience been with how to be successful, how to, build a system that is consistent, sustainable as far as growing a business?
So this is after you've launched and you have paying clients.
Yes,
Just
after
so I'm
you
clear.
have a couple, yeah, absolutely. So you have a couple of your solid first clients, taking that and continuing that journey.
Right. So now you're at the process where you got to learn from those clients. And I always have 3 buckets: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I
Okay.
create communication and conversation all the time. Like that's probably one of our biggest strengths. We create these feedback loops. Like most people just service the client and treat them almost as an outsider. They're not. They're a key stakeholder in your company. It's just like investors. If you're raising money, the investors are in your house. They're a key stakeholder. They're not somebody that you keep at arm's length. You should pull on them to get more than just the capital. But going back to clients, learning what you do really well and what you don't do well with each client and having them give you that feedback and checking in. Like every check-in is not to sell something. Every check-in should be something to learn, to build a tighter relationship. That's really important. But it's also, we create really clear conversations. Like we don't sugarcoat anything. And that doesn't apply, right? That means that we're not going to sell to certain people. And that's fine. Like you have to know who you sell to really well. At the early stages, you try to figure that out because you want to be the most impactful for the client, but also the most efficient with your resources. And you can only learn that by watching the paradigm develop with clients. And you're like, with these clients, always, I need to spend more time with them. And these clients get what we're doing. They get out of our way. They listen to us and we just fly together. Like, let's get more of them. So we always make our clients bucket their client list and they usually give us their original buckets. Like, you know, and everybody says ABC. Sometimes we classify it differently depending on the industry because you want to kind of be in culture and in jargon in an industry. So we do that and then we test it. And a lot of times they're wrong because they haven't asked deep enough questions or they haven't gotten deep enough on process and triggers and ways that their customers think and behave. Like we can all classify the demographics of a client. You want to get into their head. You want the psychology of your clients.
So that's particularly interesting because a lot of the discourse that I read about growth tactics and things like this have to do with like you should be doing this for your copy, you should be sending this many emails, you should be sending this many calls. And I am curious what your own experience with those tactically are, but is what you're saying if you don't have these deep, thoughtful communications with your clients, you're learning from it, then it doesn't matter what tactics you're deploying because they don't have the quality behind them.
Yeah, we don't spend money on ads until we have doubled down on our research and our market intelligence and analysis. And then we know how to reach them, where to reach them, and what to say. Most people buy these formulaic outreach growth models that just blast. Okay, that's great, right? You're going to reach a lot of people who might look at your stuff, but how many are buying? And I've said this a lot of times. I'd rather have one person show up and work with me for $1 million than 1 million people like my stuff online and never spend $1 with me. Like
Right, right.
most people can't handle scale, but they're buying for scale, right? They buy the growth levers, they buy the big ads, but they can't handle the work. And the other thing I always see is people always want new. Most clients, and anybody can try this who's listening to you, look at your existing clients and see how you can get more projects with them or do more work with them because you already captured them. They're already a client. They don't spend enough time on existing clients. And that's one of our new, typically when we come into a company, we look at what the revenue line looks like from existing clients because everybody's always pushing the new. Okay, new's expensive to get. And I'm not saying that's not really important. We always have to keep growing, but turn around and look at your existing clients
Gotcha. So
because you have a
when
history.
right. So when you're looking at as it relates to the new, when someone is thinking about that, because I mean there are growth tactics as it relates to your relationship with your existing clients, cross-selling, upselling, deepening that relationship. Something interesting to me is when, from your perspective, does it depend on the business or the industry or some other characteristic that I don't know about yet, where it dictates whether somebody should be investing in inbound marketing, outbound marketing, salesperson, tech stacks, things like this. Um, like I mentioned,
Absolutely.
yeah, just quickly, like I mentioned, the sponsor. I'm very interested in cold email, for example, as like a method for outreach, but it kind of is in that bucket of outbound sales. And I'm just curious if it applies to everybody or if it doesn't apply to everybody, those types of things.
No, I mean, every company should be treated as unique, and that's hard when you're doing scaled operations. But, and I'll just use the cold email, right? Might be a great way of reaching more people faster. But what's your second step? Because if you don't get to the like and trust fast enough, you're going to lose them because somebody else is going to come along and hit them with better emails. So a lot of people create the top of the funnel and that's working, but then they don't drill down fast enough with enough differentiation to pull them toward your company or service or product or brand, whatever you're selling, right? So most of the time they don't think deep enough in the process. Like, what's step 2? What's step 3? At what point do I stop because I know they're never going to buy, right? Until you go through this process and study it, you're not going to know. And you could just be throwing a lot of money at the top and keep losing them. I mean, think of how low bounce rates are, visit duration. I mean, people spend a lot of time and money on very fancy websites and people bounce off of it in like 10 seconds
Right. Okay.
because they don't know what's most important to the people who are going to buy. I get the eyeball metric, but we want the buy metric. Like, what are they looking at when they buy? And that's what's going to be present on our website and so forth. And we're doing that test right now with our new consulting website.
Gotcha. So what you're saying, so say I was a founder, I came to you, I said, Bob, please, I love your content. I've been following you for years. We got this union connection. I am building, I don't know whether to invest in sales or invest in marketing. I need help. Your answer to me would be, maybe it's one of those, but it doesn't matter which one it is if you don't have a strong understanding from your first successful clients of what's going to make somebody buy. Is
Well,
that
the first thing I would say to you is sales and marketing are not exclusive, they need to be integrated. So, one of the first things we do when we're growing and scaling companies is usually bringing teams of sales, marketing, and BD all under the same management. On a certain level company, they're all becoming one unit because that's the way it should work. Because BD and sales are out in the field. Marketing should be learning from BD and sales to create better, more impactful messaging because you already know what the clients are thinking because your sales and BD people are talking to them. So the first thing I usually say to most companies is, depending on the size of the company, obviously, we need to integrate this. And that's a branded process. How your BD finds them, how your sales deals with them, what's the relationship they're trying to build, what's the steps they're using, what is their playbook. And then obviously marketing is the one that should be able to analyze and synthesize that into clearer messaging, better ROI on marketing. So regardless of the industry, we look there first because you're not spending in one or the other. Because if you're spending one and not doing the other, you're going to fail miserably because it goes hand in hand. So
okay?
did that
Cool.
answer? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
okay.
I mean, it's cool. Like I said, like learning, making mistakes. I mean, that is a common thing that I've been trying to understand with the projects, the businesses that I've been working on, is understanding. Okay, like sales and marketing are accomplishing the same thing, but they need to be understood separately. And just like you reinforced, and honestly, a lot of conversations I've had recently, it's about a higher level, a more blended approach to understanding what the objective of sales, marketing, the onboarding process, and customer success all accomplish together. Um, which is what
And it makes it,
you're speaking to.
yep, sorry. But also, once you integrate it, it makes it more proactive, not react. And that's really important if you want to be sustained success because the market's going to change on you. What we did a year ago isn't the same thing that we can do now. For most things, everything changes. People change, the economy changes, macro forces change, right? Things are constantly moving. If you don't have that kind of feedback and integrated system where you're learning from the market as it's happening, you might get caught behind. And there's a million stories where companies didn't have the knowledge, thought they were riding high, and then it just shifted on them. And technology changes about every 3 seconds.
Right, right, right. And you're saying the shifted on them and there wasn't success there because there weren't those systems in place where they received enough feedback to learn from the market as quickly as they needed to.
That, and sometimes it's ego and hubris. We're the biggest.
Well, a little bit of a transition to my next question, which I'm excited to get your opinion on. So thank you for doing that. There's two things specifically. So one of the interesting pieces of content that you put out recently was this idea. It was a snippet from, I believe, a longer interview or discussion that you had, and it was about the idea that people are always like, oh, I need to start a business, I need to scale it, I need to sell it. But there's this other aspect of running a business where it can become a lifestyle. You can enjoy the people that you're around. You can enjoy the things that you do. And I just wanted to hear you speak about that again, because I think it's important.
Yeah, I think we all get caught up in media where we have to sell our company for $800 million. And if we're not growing at X a year, we're not really good at what we do. And most businesses don't attain that. And quite honestly, most media that talks about that isn't truthful anyway. Because most companies that get high multiples and the few that get a significant amount of money from big corporations aren't usually successful. But they don't talk about what happens on the other side. They just talk like you're done the once you raise money, or you're done soon as somebody buys a piece of your company. But there's a long tail after that going into the future, right? That you have to keep running this company. So the hype is around that one moment, but most businesses are a marathon. All businesses are a marathon unless you get out and just retire and be done. And it doesn't get talked enough about. It's like building a company that you're just happy with. Like it does what it needs to do for you and your family. It takes care of their clients. It takes care of your staff. And if you're comfortable with that, what we work on is efficiency, trying to pull you out of it more. Because most owners, there's not enough hours in the day to do everything you need to do well. So the whole conversation, and I got a lot of heat for that because it's not sexy. I'm not a sexy person, by the
Interesting.
way. I'm just saying. I don't think business is sexy. I don't think entrepreneurship is sexy. It's a beautiful experience and it gives you freedom that has nothing to do with money, right? When I wanted to coach my children, I got to coach my children. Didn't mean I took off work. It just meant I worked later or earlier, depending, right? So that's, I think most people who own their own businesses, they will point to that as the reason that they keep doing it. And
Interesting.
making money is great, but it's not always there. And there's a lot easier ways to make money than starting your own company.
All right. Well, that's interesting that that there seemed to be some, I guess, feedback about that opinion, because I took it. I thought I was happy that it was out there, because I don't think there's enough, literally no content that I've consumed recently has to do with what you were saying, which is why I felt like it was important to bring up, because I think it's a really important thing. And honestly, obviously with like your perspective as well, I think it's the more common thing to happen. You build a business and it sustains you through having a family, if that's what you want to do, and the lifestyle that you want to achieve.
But it's boring to media,
True.
right? Right. And that's the problem. It's not hype. It's not clickbait. It's reality. And reality is not always glamorous, obviously.
Right.
Listen, I've learned so much from people that just run their companies. They're not flashy, they're not big. I used to bring in experts at workshops and stuff that did not have PhDs. They weren't professors. They were like pizza owners because they know cash flow. If you want to learn cash flow and you have no idea how to manage your cash, go talk to somebody at a deli or a pizzeria.
Okay.
They get cash flow. They are really good at it.
Yeah.
And listen, they're doing what they want and what they love. Hopefully, right? But they're taking care of everybody in their universe. And that's why capitalism sometimes gets this ego bash that it's all about the money. I think capitalism makes people be brutally honest because I can lie to you once. You won't be my client the second time,
Right. Right. Right.
right? I can take advantage of somebody once or twice. It's not going to last for a long time. And those are the things that I think are really important to life and make for a well-rounded kind of community. So I'm glad you brought that
You
up.
know what?
I took a lot of heat for that
You know what?
comment.
I have not done this. I've not done this yet, but because I feel so strong about what you just said, it creates a well-rounded person. I'm gonna attempt this. There you go. That was a round of applause from everybody. Because that's what I think it deserves. So for most of the people that you work with, how often, and I understand if this is different in the context of IFB, because of your guys' business model and things like that. But how often are you working with business owners that are running lifestyle businesses instead of looking to sell?
It ebbs and flows, right? Because it depends on what projects we're working on. We expect the consulting division to do a lot more with smaller business owners that are running lifestyle businesses than typically
That's
we
awesome.
play in at the white label deploy model of IFB. So we expect to have more. And some of our biggest successes for InFocus brands were lifestyle businesses that were never going to raise $1 billion. They weren't unicorns. And what is a unicorn anyway? Because they don't make that money.
Well, it
Just
changes every
somebody
three
thinks they're
seconds, I
worth
think.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so final question. One of my favorite topics, and something you were also talking about recently, is this idea of, well-rounded individuals, the ego, the idea of the ego, mind and body, like stress management, things like this. I guess just to start it off broadly, when these topics come up, what does it mean to you personally? What does it mean to you in a professional context? The idea of mind-body awareness, still miss that.
I mean, I'll take it from, because your community's business owners, I'll take it from the business owner perspective. You're just hiring somebody to fill a few hours of the day. You are not doing the job of a leader, because a leader's job is to develop and take care of their people. So it is the holistic approach to all people. And they have lives outside of the company. I've always believed that it's not a work-life balance, it's a puzzle, right? It's a mosaic. There's people who work. You can work almost any time if you're doing your job right. And when you need to take care of what's most important to you, family, friends, whatever. So we're very big on that side of the culture. Like, I'm not a micromanager. Anybody who works in my company that needs to be micromanaged won't have a job. It's that easy. Like, do your job. I'm not going to make you clock in and out. We don't have a lot of long meetings because long meetings don't lead anywhere. So we're very efficient with our time together. We also love spending time together because it's where we push each other and we learn. Personally, listen, if you're unhappy and you're super successful in business, I don't think they can be said in the same sentence, right?
Really?
And if it's just monetary things that drive you, go do it. Like, this is not me preaching to anybody that you have to be a perfectly well-rounded person. Do what you want to do. Just don't hurt
Right,
other
right,
people in the process. My focus is to make sure that I understand my people and that I know them, not just in the business setting. That's just important to me, and it always has been.
right. How has it changed over the course of these 20/30 years of running this business?
It's just more people. We have processes in place that I've taught all my new people. Is like, it's really important to anybody, and here's for anybody that has an employee, you should know their family's name, their kids, their spouse, their partner, whatever it is. You should know them at least at that level. If you know their names, you're getting closer to kind of building a real relationship. But I think for us, I've created systems where if you've just walked into our offices and experienced a meeting, you wouldn't know who was in charge. And I've heard
And
that
that,
as a negative to me before, but it's fine,
right. Well,
because my job is to empower people, right? To empower people to take ownership and hold themselves accountable, but also to take a position and prove it. So
and has your approach to being a culture builder changed over the course of 20 years, other than there being more people? How does that change, or do those processes scale for you?
what I think they change with the people you bring in. Like, a culture isn't static either. So people bring nuances to it. And, sometimes you have to change your behavior because, what the 9 of us did when we were 22 years old running around shooting film isn't going to work now
Right, right.
in a completely different generation, right? But some of the cores are the same. Have real relationships, have honest dialogue, be truthful, right? Those are the basic tenets of anything. Have real conversations, not fluff. And I'm always trying to remove ego and politics from any experience
How,
because it just
how is
gets
it?
in the way.
Yeah, how is it that you identify, for example, I mean, politics, I think is easy to identify. How is it that you identify?
Well, I don't mean politics on the The nationals. I'm talking about like politics, like office politics.
Got you, got you, got you. Understood.
That, yeah.
Understood. So,
Sorry.
when no, no, you're good. So when you say something like ego, how is it that you go about defining that, or how is it in the language of your company between coworkers, how they define something like ego?
Yeah. So the only way I was able to remove ego, even from myself, right? Because we always talk, as a leader, you have to look inward more than outward. You're like, where do I have to get better? What don't I do right? What are my biases that just naturally come out? For ego, it's just prove it to me. Like I've never needed to have the right answer in the room. I needed to find the right answer, and it doesn't always come from me. And the ego thing for me is there are people that you meet that are just dogmatically whatever they say they feel is right, but they can't back it up. So I just said, okay, I get that. There are some really smart people that just feel that, and that's the way they work. You can say whatever you want. You have to prove it to us. And
Understood.
that's why a lot of our meetings are these semi arguments, because people are passionate. And I love passion. Like, I don't want my teams to just sit there and check a box. I want them to be fully invested in what we're doing. And this kind of prove it system has worked for us, right? And I'm going to see how it works as we expand our consultancy division with consultants that probably have not had that environment before. So I'm
I'm
really
very
interested. And
optimistic.
we'll say, like, listen, I can't expect everything to work all the time, right?
Yeah, right,
Because
right.
most things don't work. So we'll see what happens, and I'll give you an update.
Well, I hope it's another 45-minute long update because this was awesome. We're coming up on time. So I have a final question that I usually like to end it with because first of all, obviously, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all these
Thank you,
questions.
Glenn.
I've personally learned a lot, and somebody in your position, I cannot wait to hear what is something either recently, can be very small and specific, or broad overall, that has been sustaining that inspires you.
It's gonna be so cliched. It's the relationships and the team motivate me every day to do better. They also drive and push me to be better. And I would be lost without those relationships, to be brutally honest. So, and
Well, I mean,
I always want to solve the next puzzle, right?
right. Yeah, I would say that's not it's not at all cliche to me, and I think there's something to be said by the fact that those relationships that you say push you and motivate you, you did create. You did have a large hand in creating that environment for you. So that's awesome.
Well, it's all a team effort. Anybody who takes a bow for creating something, it's always dynamics of the team and the people around you. So I can't do that. It's the people you see interacting with our stuff online and some of the other staff you'll meet over time from our companies. They all had a hand in it. I just
Awesome.
have to be the mouthpiece, which I never wanted to be, by the way.
Oh, you did a great job. I mean, so thank you for doing it. Where can people find you if they hear this? Where can people find you?
We exist on LinkedIn almost exclusively until tomorrow when the new website will launch.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm excited to
Thanks,
have you on
bud.
again for the update. All right.
I look forward to it.
You got it. See you, everybody.